Now, let's get into the message. We've been going through a new series about finding joy again. And we've been diving into these unique topics in which commonly in life we lose that sense of hope, that flutter in our hearts in these different areas. We've talked about our faith. We talked about our romantic life. And today, we're going to talk about finding joy in my family. Finding joy in my family. And I think that family can often be a source of our greatest joys or our deepest pains. What is so funny? Yeah. Well, check this out. It can also feel like home, or it can feel like hell. See how I used alliteration there? While each person in a family makes their own choices that impact everybody else, there's still something spiritual and sacred that ties us all together. And whether it feels good or not, these are our people. And this is essentially what it is to be family. And today we're going to talk about what it looks like to find joy again within our families. At the heart of this conversation is really going to be about forgiveness, both practically and spiritually. And we're going to unpack the difference between forgiveness, reconciliation, and boundaries. We'll also talk about the silent damage that bitterness can do when we refuse to let certain things go. And it matters for us to talk about this because for most of us, there was joy in our family once. But maybe now it feels distant, maybe dry, or maybe gone altogether. And what we talk about today could breathe life back into that joy, or protect the joy that is still there, still present. And inviting God into your family is one of the most meaningful things that you can do, not just for your faith, but for your future. Because when you do, God doesn't just bring peace, He's able to work miracles when we let Him in. So, with all that being said, let's go into our first point, which is, oh man, a little excited there. I see now, everyone has made mistakes. See, I think that making mistakes is part of being human. And honestly, it's kind of bizarre when you think about it. This idea that mistakes humanize us. Not one single person is perfect. Ironically, the people who believe that they are perfect often end up completely isolated. It's like this reverse polarity within our souls, that it pushes other people away when we pretend to be perfect. But when someone is honest about their flaws, it draws people closer. These imperfections humanize us to one another. And I think that most of us can say that we know that nobody is perfect. It's just like a reality. We can say that and we know that. But that doesn't stop us from comparing our imperfections from one another. And some mistakes seem understandable or even reasonable, but others feel unforgivable. But if we're going to bridge this gap between family members, we have to start by understanding everyone's imperfections. And that these imperfections are different, and that includes ours too. So today we're going to, for all of this message, we're going to look at a story that is this imagery of a family seemingly falling apart and being in this moment in which it seems like they're being brought together again. And it's a story of the Prodigal Son. It's a story where we're going to read it in sections to explore the different perspectives within this household. And first, we're going to look at the one who seemingly makes the biggest mistake. I'm going to read in Luke chapter 15, starting in verse 11. And it says, "To illustrate this point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, 'I want my share of your estate now before you die.' So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons. A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land. And there he wasted all his money in wild living. About the time that his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land, and he began to starve. and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into the fields to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him. Sorry, I just salivated thinking about, like, if I was seeing pigs eat stuff, I would imagine eating the pig instead. But I guess he was Jewish, so he's not allowed to eat pork, so that's why he's looking at the pods. But I was just seeing, like, sizzling bacon right in front of you, man. You're looking at the pods. Anyway, but no one gave him anything. When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, "At home, even the hired servants had food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, 'Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant.'" So, pausing here in the story, I think that there's so much in this passage but we're going to start with the younger son's mindset. He wants out of his family. Can I get a witness? He wants out of his family. He's completely done, but not without the benefits of the family. He wants the privilege, but not the presence. And it's this moment in which he asks for the inheritance without the relationship. And truthfully, most of us have acted like that at some point. Maybe we ran away from our family because something big happened, or maybe it was years of slow hurt building up until we finally snapped. Either way, we still expected certain things from the people that we left behind. And maybe I'm not talking about this physical running away, but mentally and emotionally you have severed yourself from that person or those people. And it's because we had these expectations from them because they were supposed to be family. And we still expected them to act a certain way, to love us a certain way, to show up for us in a certain way. See, for me, there's a moment where I had a season where I had emotionally left my family. Not my kids and my wife, but like my childhood family. And my heart was, I'm going to just start my own family. This one's done. It's run its course, and I'm ready to move on. And I felt abandoned, I felt hurt, and I was ready to just leave all that behind and start fresh. Y'all dig what I'm saying? And deep down, I still expected those family members to show up some way. For example, with my kids, I still wanted them to show up for their birthdays. I left my family behind, but for my kids, they're still their family, right? And so I had these expectations for my old family to show up for my new family. And when they didn't, I was even more bitter. That bitterness grew more, because the truth is, they couldn't win no matter what they did. I had this moment, this epiphany, where I honestly realized that my old family could not win. Because if they had shown up, my heart was too wounded to be able to receive them. I wouldn't have wanted them to be there, even though I wanted them to be there. And when they didn't show up, I quickly point the finger and say, see, they didn't show up. They were never going to win. They were at a loss because the root issue wasn't their actions. It was my own need to heal and forgive, regardless of them. Y'all dig what I'm trying to say? And I want us to understand this idea of expectations. This idea of expectations, that it's this idea that we expect certain family members to behave certain ways. But we know that people are imperfect, right? And most times we know the imperfections of certain family members. Do we not? Like, we know how they are. That one family member, I won't be descriptive, but you got that one family member like, oh, they've always been like that. They're not going to come. They'll never come. And we have this understanding of how we already understand what not to expect, but we're continually disappointed because they didn't meet the expectations of us wanting them to behave differently than the way they are. Y'all feel what I'm saying? I want you to consider a classic model of what you imagine, and this is just random, okay? I'm not trying to be specific. I'm not trying to call any of my family members out, but just think of like the classic model of maybe you have a bad relationship with your mom, and you expect your mom to be a loving, nurturing mom, but they're not. And every time that they're not, you're still disappointed and hurt because you wish you had a loving and nurturing mom. Y'all feel me? And see, we keep getting hurt in this process of expecting people to behave differently than their imperfections. And at some point, even though it's disappointing, we're self-inflicting our wounds because we're expecting these false realities. Y'all feel me? Now let's shift gears a little bit, and I want us to look at the moment that the young man has his turning point. When he sees his own mistakes. It says that he came to his senses, and that's when something changes. See, through his humility, he begins to see his family not with resentment, but with grace. And he starts to imagine that maybe there was still a way back to his family. And again, we're looking at him specifically right now. And I think that a lot of us experience this same kind of shift when we become parents. You know, when we become parents, we have this moment in which we see our parents differently. So it's, for those of y'all who don't parents, just wait. You'll see what I'm talking about. But it's because we find ourselves saying and doing certain things that we swore to ourselves that we never would do. I'm never going to tell my kid no. I will yell no. I won't be specific. I don't want anyone calling CPS. Okay. But it's this idea that we start to get how complicated life really is. We perceived that we knew exactly what we would do and how we would do it on paper. But then once it comes to actually living it out, we realize it's a lot more complicated than that. And we make some of the same choices that our parents made, and sometimes the same mistakes, and sometimes even worse mistakes. And it's in those moments when we finally see our humility, in our humility of knowing that we don't got it all figured out, we recognize our humanity. And once we recognize our own humanity, it helps us to see the humanity in those family members. And the people that we once resented. Now, I want to be clear in saying that I am not justifying every single thing. I am generalizing some stuff here. I'm not trying to say that every specific wrong thing was like, you would have probably done it too if you were in their shoes. No. Okay? I'm just speaking to this general sense. Y'all feel what I'm saying with that? So don't just eat the meat and spit out the bones for that part, okay? If you were abused, it doesn't mean like, well, I guess I would have abused my kid. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. It's this general idea of recognizing our humanity, recognizing our own imperfections, and giving grace to the imperfections and humanity of some of these family members. Maybe not all of them, but some of them. Now, that leads us to our next point, which is it doesn't matter. Forgiveness is the only way to truly heal. I think that similar to love, forgiveness isn't a feeling, it's a choice. And I picture it almost like this. I imagine on the day of judgment, or judgment day, depending on how you prefer to word that. I want you to imagine God before you and bringing out the people that hurt you. And I mean really hurt you. And God saying, I saw everything that they did to you, and I saw how much it affected you. I saw how even some of the mistakes you regret were formed and rooted in what they did to you that hurt you so much. And I have them right here, and I'm ready to punish them for what they did. Do you want me to do that? Forgiveness would be, whether through tears or clenched fists, saying, no, I release them. I don't want to be connected to the consequences they may deserve. I release them, not because they deserve it, but because you don't want their pain tied to your life anymore. It's this disconnection. It's this releasing. And forgiveness is releasing that grip of what may be potentially owed to you. It's releasing a grip off of their life onto yours and yours onto them. And it doesn't mean that that pain disappears overnight. See, you're still human, and you may still feel it sometimes. But when you forgive, you start the healing. And I think it's just like a real wound that takes this time to process, this time to heal. And similar to a normal wound, you may be able to just leave it there, and over time, it's just going to be this big, nasty scar, but eventually it will most likely heal. Might still click every now and then, but it will heal. But there's also other things that you may be able to do to help expedite that healing process, to nurture that wound to where it's not as severe in the future, right? It's the same way with forgiveness. There might be some healthy habits, there might be some counseling, some therapy, some community that help that wound to heal better. And over time, that wound might just fade to the point where you might not even notice it anymore. But the initial healing begins at the doorway of forgiveness. And similar to a regular wound, it might feel like you forgot. And other days, maybe it's raining outside. And you're like, God dang, it feels like it just happened. And see, in the same way, your life might give you a triggered memory. Might have been just something that randomly happens and it triggers your memory and it stings again. It's raining outside. And it doesn't mean that you haven't properly forgiven. It just simply means that you're human and you're still healing. Y'all dig what I'm trying to say? And I want us to understand that forgiveness is that simple. We don't need to overcomplicate it. I think that's where a lot of churches get it wrong, is where we're like, 32 steps to properly forgive someone. Like, dang, I don't want to go through all those steps. If you don't pray to bless them, then you haven't really forgiven them. Like, oh, that's like extra credit, dog. Like, I could just forgive, and whenever I feel ready, maybe I'll pray for a blessing over them, but I don't have to do that. I want us to look at the Father's perspective in this story, and I want us to see how forgiveness changed everything, not just for the Son, but for the Father too. It says, continuing on in this story, so he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming. Filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father said, I told you so. No, wait. But his father said to the servants, Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. And kill the calf that we have been fattening. We must celebrate with a feast. For this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. Good grave top plug right there. He was lost, but now he is found. And thus the first barbecue began. See that? I love how that part ends right there. And then the party began. Because there's certain moments we often hope to happen when we forgive someone. Especially, I think about within, marriage, per se. There's certain moments where you're fighting with each other, and you miss one another, and you might even forgot what you're actually mad about. You forgot what even started the fight. And all you want is to just be with your best friend again, for the party to begin, or at least something to happen. And you're in this moment and you're waiting, and in your mind you're thinking like, I just wish we could just act like this never happened so that the party can begin. Well, that's essentially what forgiveness is able to do. It's especially with our families. It's this moment that we forgive someone and it feels like a new beginning, a clean slate, a celebration of something that was broken finally being made whole. But I want us to not miss this, what made this moment possible. The Father's response, it almost looks spontaneous. Like he's like, oh my goodness. And he runs up and he just had this all just naturally. There's like this reaction. But when I read it, it seems like it wasn't necessarily spontaneous, but rather that it's something he had already decided in his heart long ago. And I imagine what this scene would look like of a family falling apart. And again, it's a parable, but I still like to get into it. And I notice that there's no mother mentioned in the story. And so sometimes I even like to imagine, what if this is after, say, the mom's death, which would cause a lot of grief and confusion and disconnection within a family as they're trying to navigate something so intense. And somewhere along the lines, the son has this somewhat of a breakdown, and he wants to just leave everything that hurts. He wants to just abandon it, and he wants to just feel better. He wants to forget. While the father, in his grieving is different. Again, this is just, story. His grieving is different, and he's trying to keep together what feels like it's falling apart. And they're not seeing it the same way. They're both processing their emotions differently. And eventually there's this big fight. And what most people do after a big fight is someone may just leave. They don't know what to do. They just need to get out of here. And so he says, just give me what's mine. I'm gone. And maybe the father even felt like a sense of guilt, like he should have done something different to prepare for the death or prepare for this moment. And so out of this feeling like this need to give to his son that is broken because he cares and he wants to help, he's trying to bridge this gap. Am I helping him or am I enabling him? And he chooses to look at it as like, well, maybe this is the best thing for him. And he gives him what he's got. And then after his son is gone, it's silent. The other brother is there. They eat breakfast in silence. They don't know how to build from here. And it's quiet. And even though it's quiet, he's laying in bed, replaying it over and over in his mind. I'm a good storyteller, right? He's playing it over and over. And as he's looking at the ceiling, he's imagining what could have been different that night. And he's wondering, maybe I should have said this different. Maybe I shouldn't have given him that money. Maybe I should have stopped him. Maybe I just needed to hug him. And he's just playing it over and over and wondering what could have been differently. But at some point, it seems like he settled in his heart this moment where he's ready to just, and rather than dwell on the past, he decided, whatever happens from here, if I ever see my son again, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to embrace him, and I'm not going to let go. And I think it's that kind of forgiveness that we see here. This intentional, pre-decided forgiveness. And it was this decision that the father made where it gave them this renewed sense of value for each other, even in the pain. And it wasn't just for their relationship, but it was for themselves. His forgiveness, the forgiveness of the father, helped himself heal, and it also helped the son to heal. And it's that kind of healing that only happens through forgiveness. And so that's why this point is titled, It Doesn't Really Matter about why we forgive someone, but it's this idea that forgiveness is so powerful that we should consider this concept that we must forgive. That we must, even if it is just for ourselves. And that leads us to our last point, which is, I just can't. You can have boundaries without bitterness. See, forgiveness is essential to healing, but that doesn't mean you have to become naive, gullible, or a doormat. You're not called to be a punching bag through forgiveness. See, forgiving someone doesn't mean that you always have to give them full access to your life again. You can forgive and still say, I'm not going to let this happen again. I'm not going to give so much permission for this to be hazardous. You can forgive without falling into being foolish or pretending that the pain never happened. Forgiveness does not ask us to pretend it doesn't hurt. Sometimes the most loving and wise thing that you can do in regard to forgiveness is to set boundaries with that forgiveness. Especially if the person has been toxic, abusive, or unsafe. Boundaries are necessary to go along with that forgiveness. So I want us to look at the final part of this prodigal son story, and we're going to look through the lens of the older brother. It says, meanwhile, the older son was in the fields working. When he returned home, he heard music and dancing in the house. And he asked one of the servants what was going on. Your brother is back. And I want you to just pause in that moment. How would you feel if you had the surprise visit from somebody that hurt your family? Imagine you're walking up like, what's going on? Your mom's here. Get that shiver down your spine. That sick feeling in your stomach. Aunt so-and-so is here. Oh, what? I thought she wasn't coming. I thought so too. He was told, and your father has killed the fattened calf. We are celebrating because of his safe return. The older brother was angry and wouldn't go in. His father came out and begged him. But he replied, all these years I've slaved for you and never once refused to do a single thing you told me to. And in all that time, you never gave me even one young goat for a feast with my friends. Yet when this son of yours comes back after squandering your money on prostitutes, it's kind of descriptive there. The father is like, he was out partying, I know. And the brother's like, no. Let's talk about what he was doing. You celebrate by killing the fattened calf. His father said to him, look, dear son, you have always stayed by me, and everything I have is yours. We had to celebrate this happy day, for your brother was dead and has come back to life. He was lost, but now he's found. See, what's interesting about this part of the story is the brother didn't do anything wrong. Yet he ends up being the most isolated person in the story. Everyone else is literally having a party. They're celebrating, but he's alone. And it's because his bitterness couldn't be moved. And consider that his bitterness may have well been justified, right? But even though it was justified, it isolated him. Not only that, but his bitterness starts poisoning the healthy relationships he has. Now he has this strife between him and his dad when they've been lockstep. And the bitterness is bleeding into these other relationships. See, this bitterness that he's harboring in his heart was justified, but it was only hurting him. And I want you to also consider how much bitterness has on our lives. Because not only is it is it spreading to his other relationships. Not only is it leaving him isolated, separated from the party, but it's even shaping his choices, his thoughts, his emotions, and his identity. Notice that what he says. He says, I never once asked you for anything. And you notice how the father's response is like, what are you talking about? Everything I have is yours. But see, where is that really coming from? What it's coming from is just like the father had that night, staring into the ceiling, playing it out over and over, but decided that he was going to forgive. I see that the brother had the same kind of night, but at some point, not only did he decide that he could never forgive him, but he went a step further and said, I will never be like my brother. And he has this unifying language in his heart where he decides, I'm not going to ask my father for anything because of how much my brother took from him. And see, and the father is saying, you don't even have to ask me. It's yours, buddy. It's yours. You don't even need to ask. You have such a higher access. You have higher privilege, but you can't even recognize it because you are blinding yourself through your bitterness. You're letting your brother control how you behave. And this vow that he'd made, it didn't free him. It enslaved him to this mindset. He ends up carrying this weight of resentment with everything he did. Everywhere he goes, this bitterness burdens him. And the very person that he wants nothing to do with is now so ingrained in every part of his life. So he's constantly thinking about his brother, to where even when he wants something, he won't ask for it because his brother is right here. It's ironic that we carry the person we despise. We're locking ourselves in a prison with the person we can't forgive. And this is where we also need to look at this situation with wisdom, because the older brother wasn't wrong to want boundaries. The bitterness was a matter of the heart. But the boundaries, that was good advice. You know, we don't want to let people that hurt us to walk back in with zero accountability for what they did. In fact, real forgiveness sometimes requires boundaries to preserve the healing, to protect the relationship for the future. And for me, I'll just give a personal example. When I was young, 15, 16, I had a family member that maybe they were feeling a little lively, and they decided to use my Social Security to get a credit card in my name. Don't worry, though, I didn't know about it until after I got married and was trying to start my own life, you know. And I realized, I couldn't possibly have applied for this credit card because I was a minor. Well, all is forgiven, right? No biggie. It's my credit score. What is that even for, right? No big deal. I can forgive that. Release it. But I probably won't trust that person with my Social Security card. I can forgive them, but maybe I won't leave my ID lying around them. You know, and see, it's this idea where I can forgive but still have these realistic and reasonable boundaries. Maybe I forgive somebody that hurt me when I was a kid. I can forgive them, but I'm not going to let them watch my kids. Y'all dig what I'm saying with that? There's nothing wrong with having these reasonable boundaries for situations like this. And so often we over-spiritualize forgiveness, and we forget how practical it can be. Forgiveness is deeply spiritual, but it's also common sense. And it requires this level of discernment to where we can look kind of like as a case-by-case basis. Sometimes forgiveness leads to reconciliation. Sometimes. But there's other times where it actually leads to distance. Where you can forgive and realize, I cannot be around this person anymore. And you have this forgiveness that's there, setting these boundaries as well. It's okay. You can forgive while still deciding what kind of trust, if any, can be rebuilt and how. And that kind of forgiveness, it's not only godly, but it's sustainable. Because if you just forgive blindly and continue to position yourself to be hurt in the same way by the same people over and over and over, how long can you really sustain that? How long can you really keep that up? How many times can you forgive? Yes, I know Jesus said forgive 7 times 70. Yes. But even Peter was like, God, are you serious? No way. It doesn't mean that we have to position ourselves to test that theory. But we can use wisdom. There's times where you can forgive and it leads to this beautiful party where you're reconciled. There's other times where you're forgiving from afar and you're keeping these safe boundaries between. The doorway is still forgiveness. Now, I want us to close with this final thought. As we're talking about forgiveness and trying to find joy in our families again, I want you to notice something that's really easy to skip over in this story. Notice that at the beginning, the words from the younger son, the one that made the biggest mistakes here, was that he describes himself as, I am no longer worthy. I am no longer worthy. And he believed that his mistakes had diminished his value. And I think that regardless of whether it's family or just our personal lives, we have these moments where we recognize and regret our mistakes. And one of the most common things I get asked after doing any kind of talk about forgiveness is, how do I forgive myself? Right? And we recognize our own mistakes. And it's almost like those are the hardest to forgive. Especially when it comes to reconciling with family members. If we're the ones on the end of making the big mistakes where our family doesn't want to have anything to do with us, to the point where we don't even try to reconcile because we can't. How could they forgive me if I can't even forgive myself? Y'all feel me? I want you to consider that the way the Father treats him, this whole parable is this imagery in which Jesus is describing how God sees us and how God forgives us. And the Father in this story, he doesn't shame him. He doesn't punish him. He doesn't say, I told you so. I knew you would. Instead, he runs to him, embraced him, and covered him. And then he celebrated him. It's this beautiful imagery of how God restores our value. And I want you to just think for a moment how this story is not just about a broken family. It's about a loving Father. And it's about your worth. About people's worth. And it shows us this beautiful idea, and that is God never stops seeing our value, even when we do. You know, when my kids were about to be born, I really struggled with the idea of whether or not I could be a good dad, because I have this problem where I don't always feel things because of disassociation from trauma. It's like this therapy response of my heart, my emotions, where it's literally hard for me to feel. And so I was thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a terrible dad. I can't feel right. I don't feel this overwhelming love like I'm supposed to. I hear the way other people talk about their kids, and I was literally insecure about my ability to love. All the way up to the point of delivery. And as soon as my baby was born, I felt this overwhelming sensation of love and compassion and immense value to this new creation. There was like no hindrance, no blockade, no wedge, but I felt everything in the moment that this baby was born. And they didn't do anything to earn it. She did nothing. The very breath of life overwhelmed me to the point of tears. And I want you to consider the idea that what I felt that day was that baby's God-given value that was innate within her soul. I felt this God-given value in connection and appreciation for her life. And she didn't earn it. There's nothing that she did to earn it. But it was given to her by God. And each of us have that same kind of value. The moment that we were born with this value that was indescribable. Regardless of whether or not people recognize it in our lives, it is there. And now, if you did nothing to earn that value, can you do anything to take it away? There's nothing that you did to earn the value, but it was given to you. If you didn't do anything to earn it, can you really do anything to have it taken away from you? And what I'm projecting is that this value that you have, whether we hide it in dirt or not, it is always there. God sees each of us worthy of love, worthy of redemption, worthy of coming home into His family. And I want you to ask yourself if it's maybe your time to come home to God, to go to your Heavenly Father. As we consider this projection of real, sincere, unconditional love from God, I want you to consider, if you've never put your trust in God through Jesus, or maybe you feel like you walked away at some point, maybe you identify with that part of the story, but you feel like your Father, your Heavenly Father, is running after you. You feel like your Heavenly Father is calling you home. He's not asking you to fix yourself first. He's just asking you to come to Him. And so, with that being said, I want us to bow our heads and close our eyes. And if that's you, and you want to make a decision to put your trust in Jesus, to go to your Heavenly Father, whether it's for the very first time, or whether it's something that you feel like you need to reaffirm today, and you're going back to Him. With every head bowed and eye closed, if that's you, I want you to just raise your hand. I see your hands. I see all your hands. So there to yourself, I want you to have your own conversation with God. The Bible says in the book of Romans that if you believe in your heart and confess with your mouth that Jesus is who He says He is, surely you shall be saved. What it's saying is, if you have a genuine heart and talk to Him yourself, that's all it takes to start this sincere relationship with your Creator and Savior. You don't need me to lead you through some pretty prayer, but you can talk to your Father yourself. So just go ahead and take a moment to do that. And for the rest of you, while they're doing that, if you're here and you feel like this is a message that you needed to hear, maybe you even have it on your heart that you need to forgive certain people. If you're not ready to, you don't have to. But if you're here and there's specific people in your life that you feel like you're ready to forgive, and you want to make a moment to do that today, only if you're ready, with every head still bowed and eye closed, if that's you, I want you to raise your hand. See your hands. So just there to yourself, I want you to have a conversation with God about them. It could be as general or as detailed as you like. But just have a simple conversation where you release these people from your heart. Where you forgive them. And it's okay for it to still hurt, but the healing starts, it begins at the door of this forgiveness. Just take a moment to do that. And as we do, we're going to go into a time of worship.
Thank you for being a part of the Gravetop Church online community. I hope that today's message inspired you and that it made a difference in your life. If you'd like to connect with our church or if you'd like to donate towards our mission, all you have to do is go to gravetopchurch.com and find the Ways to Connect tab or the Donate tab. Either way, I'm so grateful for you being a part of today. Until next time, have a great life.